Boudreaux here. I want to talk with you about WordPress in this lesson. The website software that I focus on this channel is WordPress. It's amazing, it's incredible, and it hits this beautiful space between flexibility and price, okay? But before we dive into WordPress, I wanted just to talk about some basics with websites because you kind of need to know these things so that other things we talk about make sense, all right? So at a very basic level, what is a website exactly? Well, the most basic website out there is just a bunch of files that serve up data to a browser, okay? And to do that, it's kind of like a computer. In fact, let's just talk about that. If you have a Word document or a Pages document on Mac and you need to open it or create a new one or edit that document, what do you need? Well, you need a computer, right? But what are the layers of that setup? You've got a hardware layer, the actual computer itself, right? And you've got the operating system layer, which is Windows for PC, Mac OS for Mac, typically. And then you've got another layer because just the hardware and the operating system are not enough to work with that document. You need an application layer. You need Microsoft Word or Pages to edit that document, to create new documents, etc. So websites are the same way. For example, I'm a filmmaker, as you know, if you've watched other videos, and so when I'm cutting a movie, I've got a hardware layer, I've got an operating system, and then I've got DaVinci Resolve, which is the application I'm using to cut the film. So websites, web servers, same setup. A web server is basically a hardware layer, which is just like your computer. Sometimes the specs are a little different, maybe different processors, but it's the same thing. You've got an operating system layer it's called Linux typically. And then you've got an application layer because the hardware and Linux are not enough to serve up the websites. You need a web server application layer that serves up websites. And there's different kinds of web servers, Nginx, Apache, etc. But they all are doing one thing primarily, and that's serving up websites, okay? And so with that understanding, you've got a thing that's called hosting. So if you want to have a website somewhere, you got to lease space on a web server at a data center. And you choose, based on where you are in the world, you're choosing that data center location. And so there's two ways to do that. You can do shared hosting with Godaddy, SiteGround, different companies like that, or you can set up your own server, which is called a VPS, a virtual private server. And a VPS is going to give you better performance versus the shared hosting plans. Now, this can get confusing because in the old days, you had to just, to do a website, you had to hammer out all this code. In fact, my film school, writedirect.co, if you want to see the code that makes up the homepage, here it is. Kind of cryptic, right? I used to be in tech before filmmaking, and so I still do some coding for specific things, even though I'm using WordPress as well. But in the past, it was all coding. So these web developers could get paid a lot of money to make websites for companies. Well, then CMS came along, Content Management System. And a CMS allowed people to have an admin interface to their website so they could change some information themselves, add blog posts, etc. And that's continued to evolve to just fancy offerings nowadays that allow you to just drag things around and just change everything about the site pretty much without having to do any coding. So it's very nice. And so this can get confusing because there's website hosts which just host your website that you've built, however you've built it. And there's also companies like Squarespace, Wix, etc. that combine hosting with a whole interface that allows you to create these beautiful websites. And those services are great, but they also have a higher price tag. Squarespace at this time, I think it's like $25 a month to set up the most basic site. And that's the cheapest plan they have, and it continues up from there. And you can get a price break, I think, if you pay for, annually, stuff like that, but it's still a lot of money. So WordPress, again, it strikes a nice balance between letting you do what you need to do without having to know coding, but not having to break the bank to have a good quality website up. And so with that, that's what I focus on. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to set up your own VPS, virtual private server, at a company it's called xCloud. xCloud is amazing. It will give you all the flexibility that you need to do what you need to do. It'll give you amazing performance. I highly recommend it. And so we're going to set up that VPS, and then we're going to deploy a WordPress site, and then other lessons I'm going to show you how to build that site, how to integrate other marketing features that you need as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a filmmaker, whatever it is that you do, okay? So hopefully this makes sense. In a brief recap, a website sits on a web server, which is a layer of hardware, operating system called Linux, and then a web server software package, Nginx, Apache, etc. And you lease space on these servers somewhere at a data center, and you deploy your site to that, or your sites to that, and that's sort of how it works. And again, different companies like Godaddy, SiteGround, Bluehost have shared hosting, so they have a ton of websites crammed on these servers. And then other companies let you set up a virtual private server, which gives you better performance. And then you have the companies like Squarespace or Wix that combine hosting with a whole admin interface, and they just have a higher price tag to give you that package, okay? So ask questions here in the channel if you have any. Otherwise, I'll see you in another lesson where we deploy a server at xCloud and then get your site set up, etc. See you there.